The moment was a turning point for Martin Barnes, a homeless veteran who had just saved a family orchard from the brink of collapse. The old irrigation system was failing, and the crops were on the verge of perishing in the scorching heat. But when Martin stepped in to fix it, everything changed. He not only revived the orchard, but became the central figure in a larger battle over water rights, corporate power, and the survival of small family farms. What happens next? Well, you'll want to hear the whole story to see how a man with nothing turned his life around and helped save an entire community. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any more incredible stories like this one. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. Martin Barnes, a 44-year-old former combat engineer, squinted against the blazing midday sun as he crossed the cracked soil of the Delgado orchard. The late July heat bore down on him with a relentless fury, the temperature hovering well above 100 degrees. He could taste dust on his lips, feel sweat trickling down the back of his neck, and sense the dull ache in his reconstructed left knee with every step. A battered duffel bag hung from his shoulder, containing a tattered photograph of his late wife and daughter, a dog-eared copy of his discharge papers, and a modest toolkit, the sole remnants of a life he once had before everything fell apart. He was in search of shade water and perhaps a brief respite from the world's indifference. The orchard with its rows of citrus trees and a lone equipment shed seemed like a refuge, even if only for a few hours. With each step, Martin's mind drifted to the moment his life changed. One day he was a respected staff sergeant, building bridges and installing water systems under enemy fire. The next he was a civilian with no clear path. The abruptness of it all, his wife's illness, the financial burdens, the inability to hold down a job due to constant doctor visits had led to foreclosure and the shameful reality of homelessness. He had roamed from town to town, sometimes picking up odd mechanical jobs when local farmers needed help with old generators or pivot irrigation systems. But no matter how hard he worked, his knee pain and limited income never allowed him to break free from living on the streets or in temporary shelters. Now the orchard's corrugated metal shed gleamed like a sanctuary, its roof shimmering turquoise under the scorching sun. As he approached the structure, Martin noticed the orchard was clearly in use. Fences were maintained, the dirt roads recently graded, and the citrus trees looked carefully pruned. Yet no one seemed around, and the area near the shed looked untouched. The door gave way with a gentle push. Inside, the air felt cooler, though only by a small margin, and the smell of oil rust and old soil lingered. Lining the walls were workbenches cluttered with spare parts, wrenches, and pipes. It reminded him of the makeshift workshops he had set up overseas to fix water purification equipment in remote villages. He closed the door behind him, careful not to disturb the meticulously arranged tools. A discipline he learned to respect: do no harm, leave no trace. He settled on a wooden crate and removed his duffel bag. Leaning back, he took a moment to savor the relief of being out of the direct sun. He reached in for his dented canteen and took a cautious sip, aware he had very little water left. That was when he heard a distant piercing whine like metal grinding under stress. At first, Martin brushed it off as typical farm machinery noise, but his trained ear caught the telltale sign of a pump about to fail. An urgent hiss followed, then a sharp rattling. He froze in place, the instincts from his days as a military engineer flaring back to life. Something critical was malfunctioning close by. Another wave of heat pressed in, but so did an echo from his past. If someone was in trouble, you acted. That was what had been ingrained in him, even if he felt invisible in civilian life. Without another thought, he gathered his toolkit, hoisted himself up, despite the protest in his knee, and headed out the door into the punishing sunlight. It was time to see who needed help and whether this orchard could be saved. His boots sank slightly in the dusty ground as Martin followed the strange sound, scanning rows of orange trees that seemed parched under the unrelenting summer glare. Leaves drooped, a few brown patches visible on the outer edges of the orchard, signs of heat stress. The whine became louder with each step until he spotted the source, a woman in work clothes, perhaps in her early 30s, desperately tinkering with a large irrigation pump station next to a cluster of towering citrus trees. Water sputtered erratically from the main pipe, and the squeal of the motor was alarmingly high-pitched, indicating it was running beyond safe limits. Martin quickened his pace, heart pounding from the combined effect of the heat and adrenaline. The woman, later introduced to him as Anna Delgado, turned at the sound of his footsteps. Her eyes flickered with a mix of alarm and relief. Tall and lean, Anna had her hair tied back beneath a faded cap. She wore jeans stained by mud and grease, and gloves that looked worn out from repeated scrubbing. In the stifling heat, her shirt clung to her skin, and droplets of sweat traced down her temples. It was clear she had been battling the failing pump for some time. Martin recognized the exhausted, near-defeated expression. He'd seen it on soldiers' faces when vital equipment malfunctioned at the worst possible moment. "Power it down," Martin shouted over the clamor. "That motor's about to blow. Shut it off before we lose everything." Anna hesitated only an instant. She raced around to a rusty power box, yanked a lever downward, and the tortured squeal died into silence. In its place came a groan of metal cooling too fast, and the orchard felt suddenly empty without the mechanical roar. A hush fell, except for the faint buzz of insects in the distance. Martin dropped to one knee, ignoring the jolt of pain, and began inspecting the pump assembly. Bolts were missing, a seal was cracked, and the entire unit looked decades old, patched together from mismatched parts. Even the intake filter was nearly choked with sediment. Anna joined him, pulling off her gloves and wiping her brow. "My dad said this would hold a few more weeks." "Guess he was wrong," she muttered, voice tense. Martin gave her a quick nod of sympathy. "We might be able to jerry-rig a bypass if you have an auxiliary pumper. It won't be perfect, but it can keep some water flowing to these trees until we do a real fix." When she asked who he was and how he knew these things, Martin introduced himself, mentioning his former Army Corps background in water systems, though not going into the full detail of the personal tragedies that followed his discharge. Anna studied his weathered clothing, the duffel bag on his shoulder, and the lines on his face. She saw the proud posture of someone who knew his craft, yet also the weary gaze of a man who'd been adrift too long. "I don't have much to pay you with," she admitted, slightly defensive. "Dad's out right now, but if you can help, we'll figure something out." Martin assured her he didn't need money up front, just a chance to see if they could save the orchard. As he unzipped his toolkit, he felt a surge of purpose course through him. For once in a very long time, his specialized skills mattered again. The orchard's life depended on getting water to those rows of citrus before another day of triple-digit heat sapped the trees beyond recovery. The dryness in the air reminded Martin of desert deployments, and his mind buzzed with solutions. Everything about this moment felt urgent, and he intended to show the orchard's owners that he wasn't just another drifter. He was an engineer, a soldier, a man with something left to give. Working together under the relentless sun, Martin and Anna labored to patch the system. The orchard's main line was compromised by multiple leaks, so Martin proposed diverting water from a secondary station if it existed. Anna confirmed they had an older pump on the other side of the orchard, but it hadn't been used in years. It might be locked or jammed. Grimacing, Martin said, "Better a questionable pump than nothing at all." They took off toward the far end of the orchard, weaving through rows of fruit-laden branches. The ground was hard and cracked underfoot, evidence of a punishing drought that had persisted for too many seasons. Martin noticed that some trees looked healthier than others, perhaps due to quick patches in the irrigation lines. Still, many had wilted leaves, and the scorching heat left the orchard in a near-dead hush. They reached a low-slung shed containing another pump. This one smaller but less corroded. Anna rummaged for a key in her pocket, while Martin examined the piping. "If we can tie this pump into the main distribution system, we can keep part of the orchard watered. Then we'll come back and handle the big pump's meltdown," he explained. Anna listened intently, nodding with an air of determination that Martin found refreshing. He realized she was no stranger to mechanical fixes. Her calloused hands and practiced eyes suggested a lifetime of farm work. As they worked, Anna revealed pieces of her life. Her grandfather had planted the first batch of citrus saplings after returning from the Korean War. Her father, Edward Delgado, expanded the orchard to multiple varieties over the decades, occasionally taking out loans to modernize. But in the last few years, with the drought intensifying and water prices skyrocketing, modernization was incomplete. Their orchard was just limping along on outdated equipment. Anna herself had left for college and studied horticulture, only to return when her mother's health faltered. Now she and her dad managed the orchard together, determined not to let a family legacy crumble. Martin empathized in more ways than he could express. He too had lost a family, though, to different circumstances. His voice softened when he mentioned that his experience with water systems came from building purification setups in conflict zones, where every drop might mean the difference between life and death. Anna looked at him with a new layer of respect, though she asked no personal questions. By late afternoon, they had rigged the secondary pump scavenging, spare pipes, and connectors from the cluttered workshop. Martin tested each seal carefully, recalling his training under dire conditions in the Middle East. Even with the best equipment, a single cracked gasket could ruin everything. Here, improvisation was necessary. He wrapped leaks with heavy tape, hammered out bent metal parts, and used wrenches that had seen better days. Anna assisted with surprising skill, occasionally offering a locally inventive solution that made Martin smile. It reminded him of the old field motto, adapt, improvise, overcome. When they finally switched on the smaller pump, it coughed, sputtered, then hummed to life. Water coursed through the lines, and they watched as droplets began trickling over the base of the nearest orange trees. Anna sighed with relief. At least they won't dry out overnight, but Dad's going to want to know who you are. Martin simply replied, a man who got lucky enough to be here at the right time. He turned away slightly, the ache in his knee spiking again, and wondered when Edward Delgado would return and whether he would accept or reject the help of a bedraggled stranger who had literally walked off the road into their orchard. They found Edward Delgado arriving just as the sky faded from molten gold to dusky pink. The older man parked a well-worn pickup truck under a large oak near the main house, jumped out, and surveyed the orchard with quick, discerning eyes. Edward was in his 60s but stood tall, shoulders broad from decades of physical labor. His work shirt, once blue, had faded to a patchy gray, and the lines on his sun-toughened face hinted at a man who carried the weight of each harvest season. Anna hurried over to explain the day's chaos, pointing to Martin as the one who saved the orchard from a total collapse. Edward approached Martin with measured caution. Name's Edward Delgado. Heard you helped patch our failing pump. He began extending a hand that bore the calluses of a lifelong farmer. Martin introduced himself again, giving a brief mention of his engineering background. Edward's gaze flicked to the battered duffel bag, the worn boots, the slight limp details that told their own story. We've had folks pass through here before offering help and then disappearing, Edward said. But Anna says you knew exactly what you were doing. Martin shrugged. I've fixed a few irrigation systems in my time. Anna, shifting from one foot to the other, insisted on showing her father the replacement lines Martin and she had rigged up. Edward listened intently, asked pointed questions like the cost of certain parts, the time it would take to find a new motor, and whether the orchard could handle the extra stress if drought conditions worsened. Martin answered as honestly as he could, explaining that the orchard would likely need a more systematic upgrade if they wanted to sustain the trees through another scorching season. Edward nodded slowly, that guarded expression of a man who's been burned financially before. Unexpectedly, Edward clapped Martin on the shoulder. Well, you're already here. Why not stay a night in the bunkhouse we keep for seasonal workers? It's got a bed, and that's more than you'd get in that old shed. Martin hesitated, unaccustomed to such direct generosity. For years, he'd been surviving on the edges, sleeping in doorways or on battered cots in homeless shelters. He started to decline politely, but Anna and Edward exchanged a look that brooked no refusal. We're not letting you wander off after saving half our orchard, Anna said firmly. Besides, you look like you could use a real meal. Soon, Martin found himself on the porch of the Delgado farmhouse, where the sweet smell of simmering beans, roasted peppers, and fresh tortillas enveloped him. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and the last rays of sunset streaked the sky with orange and purple. For a moment, Martin felt an uncanny sense of déjà vu, reminiscent of the calm after a grueling deployment day when he and his team would share MREs and stories under desert stars. Only this time there were no uniforms, no mission briefings, just a family's kindness and the uncertain promise of a better tomorrow. As he settled at the table inside, he caught sight of an old frame photograph on the mantel, 3 generations of Delgados, each standing amid flourishing rows of citrus trees. A pang of longing twisted in his chest. He wondered if by helping save these fields he might somehow piece together fragments of a life he thought he'd lost forever. Nightfall draped the orchard in a hush that was both serene and expectant. After dinner, Anna escorted Martin to the modest bunkhouse, a single-room cabin with a small bed, a rickety nightstand, and a tiny bathroom. Though humble, it felt like a palace compared to the places Martin had slept in recent years. The mattress, while lumpy, was clean. A small overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a warm glow. Anna handed him a spare blanket, her voice careful as though she didn't want to pry too deeply. "If you need anything, our house is right up the path," she said, then paused. "Dad's impressed. You know, he may not say it straight out, but we owe you big time." Martin nodded, unsure how to respond. Instead, he murmured a simple thank you and closed the door behind her. Alone in the dim light, he rummaged through his duffel, pulling out the worn photograph. His wife, Patricia, and their little girl, Lucy, smiled at him from a moment frozen in time. They had been his anchor when the world felt uncertain. Once they were gone, that anchor vanished, and he drifted through life like a ghost. He set the photo on the nightstand, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the quiet hum of crickets outside. For a fleeting moment, he imagined a future where he might sleep under a real roof again, without the fear of being asked to leave at dawn. He woke at first light, still half expecting a knock on the door, telling him to go. But instead, the smell of breakfast wafted in through the open window. Determined not to overstay his welcome, Martin washed up quickly, changed into the cleanest clothes he had, and limped toward the main house. He found Edward in the kitchen finishing up some paperwork. Anna was at the stove flipping tortillas, and an older woman who Martin presumed was Edward's sister. Paula busily arranged plates. "Morning, soldier." Edward greeted him with a faint smile, an old radio playing a low country tune in the background. "Hope you slept all right. We've got a busy day ahead if you're up for it." Over a breakfast of eggs, beans, and homemade salsa, they discussed the orchard situation in more depth. Edward explained that they were losing the fight against drought and outdated equipment. Last year, a major water purchasing corporation, Aquacore, had started hovering around small farms in the region, offering too-good-to-be-true buyouts. A handful of neighbors had caved. The Delgados, however, were determined to hold on to their land. Though they were at a tipping point financially, Martin listened and felt a surge of protective resolve. He knew what it was like to lose everything, and if there was a chance to help these people keep their legacy, he wanted in. After breakfast, they walked the orchard, checking lines and discussing strategies to improve the irrigation system. Martin proposed a phased plan: start by fully repairing the main pump and integrating the secondary pump for backup, then gradually implement updated piping to reduce leaks and maximize water usage. Edward's eyes lit up at the idea. Anna asked about the cost, and Martin conceded it wouldn't be cheap, but it would be far less than installing a brand new system. In his mind, Martin was already sketching designs, recalling how he'd once kept entire refugee camps supplied with water using salvage parts. This orchard in many ways was just another mission. News traveled fast in farm country. By midday, two of the Delgados' neighbors, both older gentlemen in rumbling pickup trucks, pulled into the orchard, having heard rumors that Anna and Edward had found someone to fix the irrigation. Martin was in the workshop, elbow deep in the main pump's motor, when he felt a presence looming behind him. He turned to see a tall, wiry man with a bushy mustache and steely gray eyes studying his every move. Next to him stood a shorter, rounder fellow who smelled faintly of tobacco. "You the fellow who saved half the orchard?" asked the tall one, whose name turned out to be Gus Collins. His companion, Walt Mendoza, merely grunted in greeting. Martin nodded, an uneasy feeling stirring in his chest. He was unused to so many eyes on him, especially older farmers who typically guarded their trust. But Gus and Walt seemed more curious than hostile. "Edward says you might do custom repairs," Walt asked. "Got some issues on my ranch, too. Think you could handle them?" Before Martin could respond, Edward strolled in, wiping sweat from his brow. "Fellas, give him a minute to breathe," he said with a laugh. "He's just getting started on ours." The men chuckled, but their faces betrayed a deep worry. This orchard wasn't the only one in trouble. Aquacore had been systematically pressuring local farmers to sell their water rights, and mechanical breakdowns, like the one Martin was fixing, often became the tipping point for families too, worn out to keep fighting. The desperation in their eyes told Martin everything he needed to know. These people felt cornered, and he might be the only hope they had left to avoid an all-out corporate takeover. Anna appeared carrying a cold pitcher of lemonade. "Let Martin at least tighten the last bolt before you hire him away," she joked, though a tension laced her voice. They all took a break outside under the shade of a weathered barn. Over lemonade and dusty conversation, The farmers detailed stories of how Aquacore would swoop in whenever a well dried up or a pump failed. They dangled lucrative offers, but the fine print essentially surrendered water rights indefinitely. "Without water, we're done," Gus admitted, voice thick with frustration. "We might as well sell if we can't keep these systems going." Martin sipped quietly, absorbing it all. He recalled how in war zones, big contractors would also appear with quick solutions that locked local communities into crippling dependencies. The parallels unsettled him. He removed a small notepad from his pocket, an old military habit, and scribbled notes about pump sizes, approximate water usage, leak points, and spare parts the farmers might already have lying around. "If I can get your pumps operational again, do you promise me one thing?" Martin asked Gus, and Walt looked at him warily. "Promise me you won't sign anything until you see if we can hold out. These corporations rely on panic." Walt exchanged a glance with Gus before nodding. "We've come this far," Walt said. "If you think we can fix it, we'll hold off." Martin gave a resolute nod, feeling the weight of these farmers' trust settle on his shoulders. Standing in the orchard's dusty perimeter, he realized he was no longer simply a handyman patching pipes. He was stepping into a larger fight, one that pitted the grit of small-town farmers against the might of big business. And for the first time in years, Martin felt a spark of pride. This was his new battlefield, saving livelihoods and legacies, one leaking valve at a time. 3 days passed in a blur of machinery grease, makeshift welding, and constant rechecks of pressure gauges. Martin seldom slept more than 5 hours a night, and even then he often jolted awake, half dreaming of alarm sirens or the hiss of water gushing from damaged pipes. Yet despite the exhaustion, he felt a sense of renewal. Edward, Anna, and even Paula, who mostly handled household tasks, did their best to make sure Martin was fed and had at least a few quiet moments to catch his breath. Anna, who possessed her own share of agricultural know-how from college, collaborated closely with Martin. Together, they combed through diagrams he drew on old scraps of paper, discussing modifications that might boost water efficiency by as much as 15 or 20%. But just as things seemed to be progressing, a glossy black SUV rolled up the main road to the orchard on the fourth morning. Out stepped a pair of executives' crisp suits in sharp contrast to the dusty farmland. One introduced himself as Brandon Nichols from Aquacore. The other, a tall woman with stern features, was introduced as Darcy Law, an acquisition specialist. Their presence was like a gust of cold wind in the stifling heat, sowing unease among the orchard's residents. They insisted on meeting with Edward, who warily invited them to speak on the porch. Martin from the workshop watched as the pair made their pitch. He couldn't hear the exact words, but he noticed how Edward's posture stiffened. Anna joined him soon after, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in suspicion. Finally, Edward stood, shook his head firmly, and gestured for them to leave. Brandon Nichols looked annoyed, but kept his corporate poise, handing Edward a card with some parting remark. The SUV departed in a swirl of dust. Edward sighed heavily as Martin approached. "They're raising their buyout offer," the older man muttered, "claiming the orchard is on the edge of collapse, so it's our last chance for a fair deal. They must have heard we're patching up the system. They don't like it when farmers solve their own problems." Anna kicked the porch railing in frustration. "What they're offering might look good on paper," she said, "but it'd mean we lose our water rights. In a year or two, they'd own everything." Martin nodded, face grim. He remembered how those deals went down overseas once a vulnerable region signed away control. Outsiders exploited it until there was nothing left. Undeterred, Martin got back to work. That afternoon, he rigged a new bypass that channeled water from the orchard's shallow well to the older pump, ensuring that the orchard had a backup supply if one station failed. With each improvement, the Delgado's orchard grew less reliant on outside interventions. By sunset, water flowed more steadily through the rows of citrus trees than it had in years. When Anna read the pressure data on her tablet, her eyes sparkled with cautious optimism. Yet Martin sensed storm clouds gathering. Even if the sky remained bright, Aquacore wouldn't vanish after one refusal. They were likely analyzing how a homeless veteran had managed to restore a failing orchard in mere days. He suspected phone calls were being made, deals were being considered. As he shut down the generator for the night, Martin felt a prickle on the back of his neck. The same alertness he felt on the eve of a major conflict. Something bigger was coming, and he hoped they'd be ready to face it together. It was around this time that Martin received an unexpected message. Late in the evening, while he was wiping down his tools, Paula came rushing into the workshop with a phone in her hand. "You have a call," she said, slightly breathless. "Somebody named Thomas Reynolds says it's important. He asked for you by name." Martin's heart skipped. Thomas Reynolds was a name from his military past, an officer he'd briefly served under in a joint engineering project overseas. He hadn't heard from Thomas in nearly a decade. Martin took the phone, bracing himself. "Thomas, that you?" A deep laugh responded on the other end. "Martin Barnes, as I live and breathe," Thomas said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Heard you've been making waves in a quiet little corner of farmland. My company's data analytics picked up some interesting irrigation changes, massive efficiency improvements that defied local trends. We traced them back to an orchard in Redwood County, and guess whose name popped up?" Martin stared at the scuffed workshop floor. Mind racing, Thomas explained that he was now the director of engineering for a company called Greenflow Innovations. Their specialty was in advanced water management and sustainable agricultural systems. "We've been scanning satellite data on water usage," Thomas said. "Saw a sudden spike in efficiency, like big enough to catch our analysts by surprise. Then I recognized the signature of your handiwork, improvised solutions under resource constraints. Nobody does that quite like you." Thomas then made an offer that left Martin speechless. Greenflow wanted to send a small team to evaluate the Delgado Orchard's new setup test, the modifications, and potentially roll out a pilot program to help other farms in crisis. "This could be huge," Thomas added, his voice tinged with excitement. "We've been trying to prove that localized improvements can beat out big corporate buyouts. If we can show success here, we might replicate it across the entire region. And I want you leading that initiative." Before Martin could respond, Paula tapped his shoulder anxiously. Edward and Anna had appeared at the workshop door, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. They could tell something monumental was happening. Martin quickly summarized the situation. An old military acquaintance, now a key figure at a water technology company, had noticed their orchard's improvements and wanted to help. The Delgados exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Hope, skepticism, excitement, caution all swirling together in an instant. After a few more minutes of conversation, Martin hung up the phone and exhaled. "They want to visit in the next couple of days," he told the Delgados. "Thomas said their CEO might even fly in." Anna looked startled. "We've barely caught our breath from AquaCor's visit," she muttered. Edward rubbed his temples. "Are we trading one corporation for another? We don't want to lose control of our land." Martin shook his head. "Greenflow claims to have a different model. No buyouts, no forcing farmers to sell water rights. They profit by licensing technology and improving yields, not by owning the water. But we have to see if that's true or just talk." The orchard lights hummed overhead as the three of them stood in thoughtful silence. Another big player was entering the arena, complicating an already precarious situation. Yet the possibility of real support, ethical support, sparked an ember of optimism. In Martin's chest, conflicting feelings warred loyalty to the Delgados' struggles, a sense of duty to repay their kindness, and the lure of finally regaining a career that recognized his engineering genius. He realized that the next few days might shape not just his own destiny, but the fate of every small farmer in the region. True to Thomas's word, a small propeller plane buzzed over the orchard 2 days later before landing at a tiny airstrip some miles away. By mid-morning, 2 SUVs bearing Greenflow Innovations logos rumbled up the dusty farm road. Martin, Anna, and Edward walked out to meet them near the same spot where AquaCor's suits had arrived. The difference was palpable. The Greenflow team hopped out dressed in rugged khakis and work boots, accompanied by an older woman with a commanding presence who introduced herself as Dr. Lauren Morgan, CEO of Greenflow. Dr. Morgan wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. After brief pleasantries, she said, "We've been analyzing your orchard's water usage. The efficiency jump is astounding. Our satellite data shows a near 20% reduction in water draw, without any reported decrease in crop health, maybe even an improvement. We'd like to see how you did it." Anna and Martin exchanged a glance, then invited them to the workshop. Along the way, Thomas Reynolds caught Martin's arm in a firm handshake. eyes alight with the energy of old camaraderie. "Knew you had it in you," he whispered. "Just didn't know you were out here, saving farms." Inside the workshop, Martin laid out the sketches, improvised pump modifications, and reorganized piping systems he had put together. Dr. Morgan and her team asked pointed technical questions, scribbling notes on tablets and snapping photos with specialized cameras. Anna, stepping confidently into an expert role, explained how they monitored soil moisture pressure levels in daily usage. Edward hovered nearby, still cautious about corporate involvement, but clearly impressed by the team's sincerity. The turning point arrived when Dr. Morgan asked about the orchard's financial position and whether they'd considered selling to Aquacore. Edward frowned and admitted they'd been approached multiple times but refused to surrender water rights. "That's exactly why we're here," Dr. Morgan replied. "Our approach is different. We partner with farms to install advanced systems, share the risk and profit, and keep the farmers in control of their own resources. It only works if you stay independent. Otherwise, we'd just be another big fish swallowing a smaller one." At lunch, Paula served up hearty plates of rice, beans, and roasted vegetables to the entire group, who sat around a makeshift table outside under a canvas awning. The mood was cautiously optimistic, conversations mingling local gossip with discussions about advanced irrigation sensors and automated control systems. Thomas recounted how Martin once repaired a disaster-struck filtration plant overseas with little more than duct tape and raw ingenuity, painting a picture of Martin's past that Anna and Edward had never fully heard. For Martin, it felt surreal hearing his old war stories in a farm setting. He caught Anna's gaze, noticing the new understanding in her eyes. He wasn't just a wanderer with mechanical skills. He was an innovator who had faced life or death stakes many times. By evening, Dr. Morgan made a formal proposition. Greenflow wanted to designate the Delgado Orchard as their pilot site for a new community sustainability program. They'd bring in updated hardware, advanced analytics, and staff training in return for a fair licensing arrangement. No transfer of water rights, no forced buyouts. Edward and Anna agreed to look at the details, their relief unmistakable. As the sun sank into the horizon, painting the orchard in a gentle glow, Martin sat on the bunkhouse steps reflecting on how dramatically life had changed in just days. There was a genuine chance here to protect the orchard, help neighboring farms, and maybe find the redemption he'd been seeking for so long. While the Delgado family pored over the partnership documents, Martin busied himself finalizing the orchard's upgraded system. Word of Greenflow's involvement spread quickly through the farming community, attracting both support and skepticism. Gus Collins and Walt Mendoza reappeared, each asking if Martin could help with their own systems. Soon, a local co-op manager called to inquire about possible group upgrades. Even the county extension office left a message curious about the orchard's sudden success in water conservation. Amid this buzz, tension also simmered. Rumors circulated that Aquacore was furious about losing potential water rights, especially if an innovative competitor like Greenflow gained traction. Martin, for his part, tried to maintain focus on the tangible tasks. He replaced corroded valves, fine-tuned a pressure regulator, and tested a new filtration add-on for the shallow well. Anna assisted, bringing her horticultural perspective, while Edward double-checked calculations to ensure they weren't overspending. As the orchard's pipes filled with revitalized water, Martin found himself fielding unsolicited job offers from some neighbors, people who recognized that a well-trained engineer who could tackle water issues was worth his weight in gold. Still, Martin declined for the moment. He'd committed to seeing the Delgado project through, especially with Greenflow now in the picture. That sense of loyalty tugged at him. These were the first people in years to treat him not as a transient, but as a partner. By the time Dr. Morgan returned with Thomas Reynolds and their legal counsel, the Delgados were ready for a final conversation. They gathered around the old kitchen table, a mismatch of farm life and modern technology, as laptops and thick binders lay next to a bouquet of wildflowers. Dr. Morgan explained the contract's key points. Greenflow would invest in the orchard's infrastructure upgrades at cost, with repayment spread out over several years. The orchard kept full ownership of water and land rights. In return, any new revenue from improved crop yields or reduced water bills would be shared between the Delgados and Greenflow under a fair split. If the orchard didn't see any revenue increase, Greenflow shouldered the loss. It was a gamble, but one that offered hope of preserving the Delgados' independence. Edward closed the contract folder and looked Martin in the eye. "You trust them?" Edward asked in a low voice. Martin inhaled, recalling Thomas's unwavering support back in his military days, the sincerity in Dr. Morgan's approach, and the difference between this and Aquacore's predatory tactics. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I do." Anna reached across the table and took her father's hand. "We can't keep going like we are." "Let's do it, Dad." Edward exhaled a long breath. "All right," he said, turning to sign on the dotted line. A ripple of emotion passed through the room, relief, excitement, maybe a bit of fear. But it was a moment of unity, as if they'd all decided to stand against a bigger threat in the name of preserving homegrown roots. Later that evening, after Dr. Morgan and her team departed, Martin and Anna walked the orchard rows, checking on drip lines that now gleamed under the moonlight. The rhythmic drip-drip of water felt soothing, a far cry from the frenzied hiss and rattle when Martin first arrived. Anna stopped to brush her fingertips over a cluster of blossoms. "It's strange," she said softly. "I feel like we're on the edge of something incredible, yet it's all so fragile." Martin nodded. He understood that feeling all too well. One victory in a dusty orchard didn't guarantee the future. But for tonight, the orchard was alive, hydrated, and hopeful, and so was he. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. GreenFlow shipped in advanced sensor arrays and solar panels designed to power a centralized monitoring hub. Engineers arrived to install soil moisture probes that fed real-time data into Anna's tablet, allowing for pinpoint adjustments in irrigation. Martin coordinated with local welders to fabricate sturdier pump housings. Meanwhile, a newly formed cooperative of nearby farmers, led by Gus and Walt, came to observe the progress, curious about replicating the system on their lands. The orchard transformed almost visibly. Leaves took on a richer green. New blooms sprouted, and the faint hum of efficient water movement replaced the old mechanical groans. Paula joked that it was as if the orchard itself was breathing more freely. Edward, though still stoic by nature, radiated a subdued optimism as he realized they might not just save the orchard, but elevate it to a model farm. Anna's horticulture studies meshed perfectly with Martin's resourceful engineering and GreenFlow's technology, creating a synergy few had expected. Amid the day-to-day excitement, Martin wrestled with an internal conflict. Dr. Morgan and Thomas both hinted they wanted him in a permanent role at GreenFlow. They envisioned him leading a field innovation unit, traveling to struggling farms, implementing the same solutions, and training local crews. It was the kind of position Martin had once dreamed of, putting his skills to use to help people directly, all while earning a stable income and regaining professional respect. Yet he hesitated. After so many years of drifting, the Delgado's orchard had become his anchor. He was afraid that leaving it might break whatever fragile sense of belonging he had found. "Think about it," Thomas urged over a cup of coffee one morning. "You already know how to adapt systems in tough conditions. You'd be helping thousands of families just like the Delgados. This orchard is only the first step. We need you." Martin said he would consider it. The notion of traveling again, living out of a suitcase, even if it was for good, stirred a sense of unease. But a part of him also burned with the desire to do more to protect small farms from the likes of Aquacore and ensure that no farmer felt the hopelessness of a failing irrigation system. Tension from Aquacore also continued to loom one day. While Martin was installing a new digital flow meter, a black sedan rolled by on the main road, slowing conspicuously. He caught a glimpse of Brandon Nichols in the passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear. The sedan didn't stop, but the message was clear. Aquacore was watching. Martin's jaw tightened. These corporate watchers had resources far beyond a small orchard's means. Their attempts to corner the water market could ramp up any time, especially if they saw GreenFlow as a direct competitor. Still, each day the orchard thrived a little more, and each night Martin fell asleep with the satisfaction that he was doing meaningful work. The bunkhouse, once a meager shelter, felt almost like home. He found himself tinkering with small personal projects, mounting a solar-powered lamp outside, fixing the old radio so it picked up local stations. These were modest gestures, but helped him imagine a future where he wasn't living moment to moment. Perhaps a day might come when he'd hang a sign on a workshop door, reading Barnes Engineering. Until then, he'd pour every ounce of skill into keeping this orchard alive and the promise of an alternative water future afloat. Just as the orchard's prospects seemed brighter than ever, an unforeseen crisis struck one particularly scorching afternoon. The digital control board that Greenflow had installed began malfunctioning. Anna's tablet started showing contradictory data. One sensor claimed the soil was oversaturated, another insisted it was too dry. Meanwhile, Martin spotted unusual fluctuations in water pressure. Initially, they assumed it was a glitch that could be fixed with a simple software patch, but within hours, multiple lines shut down due to an overload in the new system's logic controls, leaving swaths of the orchard without water in the late afternoon furnace. Frantic Anna and Martin tried manual overrides, but even the backup pump refused to engage properly. When Edward found them wrestling with wires and circuits in the workshop, sweat pouring down their faces, he grew visibly anxious. Not again, he muttered under his breath, the memories of repeated breakdowns in previous years fresh in his mind. Word spread rapidly among the small community that the Delgado's miracle orchard was having a meltdown. Gus and Walt called offering help. Thomas Reynolds, who was out of town for a Greenflow conference, scrambled to get his remote team to troubleshoot the software. Dr. Morgan promised to send an emergency technician, but he wouldn't arrive until the next day. With no time to wait, Martin improvised a solution the old-fashioned way. He bypassed the digital controllers, pulling out wiring harnesses and hooking the pumps directly to mechanical valves he'd salvaged. Anna assisted, her hands trembling slightly from the stress. It felt like being back in a makeshift battlefield hospital. Limited tools, extreme conditions, and the stakes were survival, albeit for plants rather than people. The orchard's future hung by a thread. After an intense couple of hours, water finally flowed again, albeit without the fancy monitoring system. Martin's rough manual setup stabilized pressure, and Anna confirmed that the trees would at least get the crucial watering they needed that day. Though relieved both were shaken, Greenflow's advanced tech had promised leaps in efficiency, but a single cascade of software failures nearly torpedoed everything. Anna confessed that she feared big tech solutions might be too vulnerable. Martin tried to reassure her, but deep inside he shared her concern. If Greenflow's advanced systems were prone to critical breakdowns, Aquacore could exploit that weakness, claiming the orchard would be better off under a more robust corporate structure. That night, as a hot wind rustled the orchard leaves, Martin found Edward sitting alone by a flickering lantern on the front porch. The older man stared off into the dark. "I'm not getting any younger," Edward said. "My father built this orchard. After Korea, I've held on through decades of change. But if this technology fails us too..." His voice trailed off, weighed down by the unspoken possibility that maybe Aquacore would end up winning after all. Martin laid a hand on Edward's shoulder. "We'll find a way," he said quietly, recalling how he used to reassure scared soldiers in foreign deserts. "We just have to be ready for setbacks." A short silence passed before Edward responded. "Thanks, son. Don't know where we'd be without you." The word son resonated with Martin in a deeply personal way. No matter what happened next, he knew he had found more than a place to sleep here. He had found a family that valued him, scars and all. And that was reason enough to keep fighting for the orchard, no matter the challenges ahead. By morning, Greenflow's emergency technician arrived, diagnosing the glitch as a corrupted firmware update that ironically aimed to enhance sensor accuracy. Dr. Morgan herself followed close behind, apologizing profusely for the system failure. She personally helped Martin and Anna reconfigure the digital controllers, ensuring that the orchard resumed operating under advanced automation without bypassing mechanical safeties. In private, Dr. Morgan pulled Martin aside. "We can't let this happen again," she stated, a worried crease on her brow. "If Aquacore catches wind of these vulnerabilities, they'll use it to sow doubt among farmers." It didn't take long for Aquacore to pounce. Within days, they circulated glossy brochures around the county touting foolproof technology, taking thinly veiled swipes at experimental, easily compromised systems. Rumors swirled that they offered certain farmers discounted pump replacements if they signed water rights deals. Some neighbors reported receiving phone calls from Aquacore representatives referencing the Delgado Orchard's tech breakdown as a cautionary tale that set the stage for a critical community meeting at the local Grange Hall, where farmers from across the region gathered to discuss the threat of corporate takeover and the viability of solutions like Greenflow's. Rows of folding chairs filled the dusty hall, a smell of coffee and anxiety permeating the air. On one side, Aquacore's Brandon Nichols and Darcy Law sat at a table, their faces carefully neutral. On the other, Dr. Morgan, Thomas Reynolds, and a small entourage from Greenflow prepared a presentation. Edward Delgado, Anna Martin, Gus Walt, and other local farmers took seats in the middle, determined to have their say. Thomas spoke first, explaining how the Delgado orchard had achieved remarkable water efficiency and how the firmware glitch was an isolated error already corrected. His voice was calm, projecting a sense of earned confidence. Aquacore countered with a polished pitch about security, reliability, and peace of mind, implying that advanced software solutions were too risky for small farmers. Darcy Law emphasized how Aquacore could absorb all risk, supply brand new equipment, and ensure stable returns, if only farmers would sign over their water rights. Edward stood up, took the microphone, and spoke in a measured tone that commanded attention. My family's orchard nearly died from a failing pump. A homeless veteran named Martin Barnes fixed it and then helped implement a system that made us more efficient than ever. Yes, there was a glitch, but we overcame it because we control our water. We don't have to beg some corporation for permission to water our crops. That orchard is our legacy, and we won't sell it out. A wave of applause rippled through the room, punctuated by nods of agreement. Aquacore's representatives looked uneasy. Brandon Nichols tried to retort, stating that progress sometimes required sacrifices, but the farmers had heard enough. One by one, they shared stories of corporate broken promises and the high cost of losing independence. When Dr. Morgan took the mic again, she spelled out Greenflow's approach to partnership: no buyouts, no hidden contracts, just shared tech and shared success. In the back row, Martin watched a quiet pride swelling in his chest. Here was a small community standing firm, fueled by practical solutions, mutual trust, and the grit to endure. It reminded him of tight-knit squads in the Army, refusing to surrender even when outgunned. As the meeting ended, it became clear that an alliance was forming, a collective stand against corporate takeover, built on the orchard's living proof that there was another way forward. With renewed momentum, the orchard and its community allies plunged into a full-blown transformation. Greenflow established a pilot program spanning several nearby farms, sharing Martin's irrigation blueprints and training local youths on maintenance. A sense of solidarity emerged as farmers swapped spare parts, labor, and advice, forming a grassroots cooperative that no longer felt powerless against big money pressure. Even Gus and Walt's ranches saw immediate improvements once Martin and Anna helped them swap outdated fittings for more efficient designs. Aquacore retaliated by flooding the region with new offers, claiming time-limited deals for buyouts that soared to 2 or 3 times market rate. A few smaller farms weighed down by years of debt succumbed to temptation, but many others, emboldened by the Delgado's resurgence, held firm. Martin found himself fielding endless calls asking for help or advice. His notepad swelled with sketches and half-formed ideas. Anna juggled orchard tasks with spreadsheets full of data on soil composition and water usage, ensuring they had the analytics to prove Greenflow's methods worked. Amid this flurry, Thomas Reynolds pulled Martin aside one afternoon, leading him to a quiet corner by the orchard's western fence. "It's time we finalize that offer," Thomas said. "Dr. Morgan and I want you on our team officially. You'll have a salary, benefits, and the freedom to roam wherever a farm needs you." Martin let out a slow breath, heart pounding. He had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it out loud stirred conflicting emotions. The orchard felt like home, but the chance to help more farms and to secure a stable future was irresistible. He glanced at the sun setting over rows of healthy citrus trees, recalling how Edward called him son, how Anna's eyes lit up when a new solution worked, and how Paula fussed over his meals. "Can I stay based here?" Martin asked, voice thick with the weight of the moment. "I don't want to abandon them." Thomas nodded. "We'll work out something flexible. You can keep Delgado Orchard as your primary base handle. Expansions from here. Dr. Morgan believes we should build regional hubs. This orchard could be one of them, especially with your success." That evening, Martin shared the news with the Delgados. Edward set down his coffee cup, a blend of pride and sadness flickering across his face. "That's big," he said. Anna forced a small smile, stepping away to look out the window. Martin sensed her worry. Would this mean he wouldn't be around as much? Paula, ever the mother hen, clucked her tongue. "You deserve this, mijo. Just don't forget us." Martin promised he wouldn't. The orchard had given him more than shelter. It gave him back his sense of purpose and a family who valued it. He slept little that night, mind whirling with possibilities. In the early hours, he wandered the orchard, inhaling the scent of dew-kissed blossoms. The horizon began to lighten, revealing the silhouettes of newly installed irrigation lines. He remembered how he first stumbled onto this land, desperate for a break from the scorching sun, how he almost walked away. If he had left, then everything would be different for him and for the orchard. But now the orchard was thriving, a beacon for an entire region, and he was on the cusp of a new chapter that might benefit countless farmers facing the same hardships. It felt for the first time in years like he was right where he belonged. 12 months later, the Delgado Orchard stood as the centerpiece of a regional transformation. A newly built farm innovation center rose near the orchard's border, complete with training rooms, demonstration fields, and small dormitories for visiting farmers. Greenflow funded much of the construction, but local workers, veterans, and community volunteers did the hands-on labor, ensuring the facility belonged to the people it served. The orchard itself had more lush rows than ever before, each tree nearly shimmering under a carefully calibrated irrigation schedule that Martin and Anna refined to a science. Dr. Morgan praised it as living proof that small farms could adopt big technology without losing their souls. A celebration was scheduled for the official dedication of the center. Guests poured in from all corners: local politicians, environmental groups, news crews, and more farmers than Martin had seen in one place since the big meeting at the Grange Hall. Gus bragged about how his ranch's water usage had dropped by 30% while increasing crop yield. Walt recounted how his late father would be proud to see the land revitalized. Even farmers who had sold out to Aquacore months ago showed up, some quietly lamenting that they hadn't waited a bit longer. Martin navigated the crowd in a crisp collared shirt, an unusual look for him, but this was a special occasion. From the stage erected near a glistening irrigation canal, Dr. Morgan delivered a speech on the power of collaboration, local knowledge, and modern technology. She called Anna and Edward up to share the orchard story, and the crowd erupted in cheers as they testified how a vagabond engineer rescued them from the brink of disaster. Anna teared up slightly and Edward's voice wavered with emotion, but in the end they looked radiant under the applause. Thomas Reynolds stepped forward next, announcing the expansion of Greenflow's pilot program across multiple counties. He also highlighted Martin as the head of their new field innovation unit, describing him as the heart and mind behind the orchard's rebirth. Martin felt his cheeks warm at the attention, but the applause also filled him with gratitude. He had wandered for so long, carrying guilt and grief over what he'd lost. Now here he was, standing before a cheering crowd, not as a homeless vet, but as a leader in a movement dedicated to preserving farmland and water rights. When it was Martin's turn to speak, he kept it short, hands trembling just enough to notice. He looked over the podium at hundreds of expectant faces. "I came here with nothing," he said quietly. "I thought I'd be here for a day or two, fix a broken pump, then move on. But the Delgados opened their home and hearts to me. This community embraced me. Together we've shown that we can stand against intimidation and build something better. Thank you for letting me be part of it." A wave of applause and whistles erupted. In the front row, Anna gave him a tearful grin, and Edward nodded with fatherly pride. After the ceremony, as the sun dipped behind the orchard, Martin ventured to the bunkhouse porch where his old duffel bag still rested. Inside was the photograph of Patricia and Lucy, the two people he'd loved and lost. He took it out gently, tracing the outlines of their faces. "I hope I've made you proud," he murmured, gazing at the vibrant orchard. In that moment he felt them with him, felt the orchard's quiet hush, and realized how far he'd come. Here amid the oranges and the hum of water lines, he'd found not just shelter, but a renewed sense of purpose and family, proof that even the most parched fields and the most wounded hearts could bloom again. From humble beginnings to a leader in the field, Martin Barnes's journey is a testament to the power of resilience and community. Once a man wandering aimlessly, struggling with the weight of his past, Martin found purpose by helping others. His work on the Delgado Orchard not only brought the farm back to life, but also ignited a movement to protect the rights of farmers across the region. The partnership between Greenflow and the local farmers represents a brighter future where innovation and tradition can coexist. For Martin, it was more than just a job. It was a chance to rebuild what was lost and give back to the community that gave him a second chance. What do you think of Martin's journey? Do you believe communities like this can fight back against corporate greed? Share your thoughts in the comments below.